I'll begin. The Red Bank Historic Preservation Commission will hold a regular meeting on Wednesday, March 19th, 2025 at 5:30 p.m. at 90 Monmouth Street, Red Bank, New Jersey. Adequate notice of this meeting has been posted at Borough Hall, filed with the Borough Clerk, and provided to the Asbury Park Press and the Two River Times. The commission has maintained a policy cutoff hour of 8:30 p.m. for its hearing. Want to please rise for the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So
I'd like to just.
sorry, I just had a question. Is this technically a regular meeting?
That's exactly my thing. I wanted to add in that you gave a special notice of
Yes.
this particular meeting at 5:30. Yes.
Well, I actually,
I have to do a roll
no,
call.
well, there's.
Okay,
There's two agendas.
okay. Yes,
Louis Almarini,
Present.
Marjorie Cavalier,
Present.
Liam Collins,
Present.
Paul Cagnon, absent, but he is going to join at 6. Karen Schmelkoff.
I don't know if Karen Schmeltz is here.
Cough.
Schmeltz, you got it, yeah.
Cough.
Karen S. is here.
Karen is here.
The D that I can't get.
Yeah,
Doug Miller, absent. Anthony Sotero,
I am here via Zoom. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
yes, we can hear you. It's just
Okay.
low. Okay, I think it's better now. All right.
How's that sound? Better?
And Betsy Valera. Present.
Okay, as to the agenda. The primary business to be done today will be the new business, the HPC workshop, but I'd like to just go through the other agenda items first. It's a matter of course to see if there are any comments. So I'll start with public comments. Why don't we do both public comments on this agenda and also any public comments not on this agenda? All right, there will be a regular meeting at 7:30, so that there will be another opportunity for comments. Then I'd like to go straight to actually, if anyone want to raise any old business at this session, or we'll save that for the 7 p.m. meeting.
I think that has to be at the 7 meeting.
That's fine. I'm just going by the agenda then. Okay. So then, I'd like to go straight into the workshop.
So I received a series of questions that I had asked Shauna to give a series of questions and I got a whole mix of questions here. They range in many different respects. And then I understand that some of you attended a session on Saturday, which was an overview of many different aspects of historic preservation law. I'm quite familiar with the woman who Janine Bauer, who presented that. And so there are a lot of things that you learn there, but certainly go beyond what we're going to be able to do in terms of the role, what we really want to achieve tonight. So before I go into the questions, you should have like a little toolkit with you at every meeting. That should consist of the ordinance that has been adopted, the master plan, historic preservation element. And those two components are really what are your foundational pieces of information that will guide you in your decision making. So and the questions that were asked are rather broad, and I'm going to answer them to the best of my ability, the ones that I can answer. But you should read your ordinance and understand what powers you have invested in you in the ordinance, and we can go into those again as we proceed through this. And the basis for how the ordinance was put together based on the master plan. And that really is what guides the designation. So what the first question is, what are the rights of a property owner in a designated historic district? And can they decline to participate? So this is a very interesting question because many communities that felt they were somewhat conflicted in adopting historic preservation ordinances thought maybe they would have it as a voluntary aspect. I'm familiar with only one case that addresses this issue, and it came out of like Washington State. And I think the logic and reasoning of the case very, very strong, and that is that it's not a law if you can volunteer to comply with it. And if you think about zoning, this is an aspect of land use. Some do call it an overlay, you know, and it's an aspect of the regulation of the use of land and the buildings on the land. And if you were to say I could do it voluntarily with zoning, you undermine the plan, and that's what the Washington case says, that a voluntary ordinance undermines the validity of a plan. This is part of a plan. And preservation should be part of a comprehensive plan that should be integrated with other aspects of municipal regulation. So I often, you know, and in the very beginning, I had several conversations with Shauna as the town planner in terms of understanding the relationship of zoning to historic preservation. It's one of the most challenging, most important, and most forgotten elements of historic preservation. Because you have a district, and the district has a, let's say we take you a little downtown. You have a prevailing pattern, you have a certain number of stories, you have setbacks, you have a scale and aspects of that development that probably predate zoning. But nevertheless are very essential to what makes the area have integrity as a historic district. So let's assume the height of the buildings in that district range from 2 to 4 stories in height. If your underlying zoning allows 10-story buildings, you obviously have a incompatibility. I often say it's like putting icing on a cake that's too big. Okay, so that's an aspect that is the most challenging, most difficult to accommodate, but it certainly is a legitimate one. So the next question is, what happens if there is substantial proof that a property or district, there is substantial proof, and I think what they mean to say that a property or district meets the criteria for designation as historic, but the local government doesn't approve. It doesn't get approved. You could have a master plan that very thoroughly looks at the whole, and that's supposed to be your foundational piece, is the master plan, the historic preservation element. And that historic preservation element identifies the importance of the historic structure. The governing body has the discretion to regulate or not regulate. That's their power. You really have no option to do anything. Now, if it happens to be a public building, either municipal, county, or state or federal, not federal, I'm going to take that back for the moment. Municipal, county, or state building, and it is designated on the state register of historic places, then it is regulated under the state register law, but not under a local ordinance. Okay. So the next question had to do with taxes, tax incentives, grants, and other funding opportunities the cities use or have access to that Red Bank is currently not taking advantage of or implementing, and we discussed that previously. And the great misfortune is there are very few incentives, financial incentives. State has it has had in the past year or two, it has really been promoting this, through the state funding agencies, commercial uses. So commercial buildings that are designated on the registers are entitled to tax credits if they renovate according to the criteria of the national, the national standards, the Secretary of the Interior standards. They are entitled to tax credits. The state agency had a program for commercial again, that if you keep the historic building, you get certain distinct advantages and money, actual money, not just credit. There's a minimal tax abatement program that a municipality can put into place. I mentioned it the last time we were here, but otherwise, I know that when I was on the board of Preservation New Jersey for many years, we continually promoted a state law that would have given greater incentives for the preservation of historic buildings, and there was just no interest. It has just no interest. I look at preservation as the newest kid on the block when it comes to land use regulation, and it is. So you have to just, it has a limited acceptability. It's often approached with a considerable amount of distrust because there's so much subjectivity in some of the decision making. And so, several years ago, I got involved with the first statute, and then we amended it in 1991. And there are a number of amendments that I thought really would be really good to put into place. And so I was working with the New Jersey planning officials, and we have a committee that does legislative work. And the committee, I made recommendations for some very modest changes. We're not talking about anything radical. And they said, well, if you put in anything for a change for historic preservation, they're probably going to repeal the statutory authorization. What it sadly is not as accepted as it could be, and a lot of it is because of criticism, some rightly and some unrightly, that have been leveled against actions of various throughout the state, not Red Bank.
Do I ask?
Yes, of course.
Who took that position?
That when I tried, it was called a municipal land use law.
I'm sorry, who was the person? And
Oh,
not
the
necessarily the
person?
name, but the position of the person that took that.
Member of the committee, a very prominent attorney, prominent land use attorney. And I'm not sure which one it was, but at that time, I was the only person on the committee who favored preservation and thought we could do some changes to the statute that would improve some of the language.
Okay,
So they were just prominent land use attorneys.
I mean,
So,
because a vision that I have for this, and where a place to go for this committee in Red Bank in particular, as it relates to historic properties, is we're doing the right thing.
Do you have to have your microphone on?
I think we're doing the right thing to do a survey. And to define the attributes of historic properties. And I think once we have good definitions in place, we need to evaluate our properties. And my gut sense is that there will be many properties that if you applied a very high standard as to what are the true attributes of a truly historic preserved structure, very few will meet that hurdle. And I think it's financial, it's costly to, when doing renovations, replace historic, the correct materials with same materials or comparable materials. And I think there need to be the path to success, if Red Bank believes that historic preservation is an important objective, I think for homes, the only path to success is to offer somehow financial incentives to those presumably few who have properties, who will be, with those incentives, willing to invest whatever's needed to get those properties so that they meet that high standard. And that may take the form of awards, it may take the form of tax abatement, property tax abatement, but that is what I see as, something I'd like to see pursued. We're not ready yet. There's a lot of work to be done to get there, but I see that as something that we should take a look.
And I just wanted to second that comment based on the conference we attended on Saturday. When other municipalities talked about either awards or some kind of incentives, it was, as you said, a very high bar, but it had to be based on design guidelines that are published so that the homeowner would have a checklist to understand what is expected to receive that designation as contributing. So, I think that just walking around Red Bank, you could tell that some could be getting that designation, but not a lot. But it could serve as a carrot to encourage other homeowners who may be partially there that still have some of the original ornamentation and woodwork, et cetera, to maintain it, if nothing else,
Yeah, this is the underlying, it's an underlying dilemma that you and everybody else who seeks to preserve historic resources must face. Unfortunately, municipalities, budgetary wise often have a lot of limitations. And it does happen to be, I think, a selected element that there are people who buy historic homes because they love historic homes. They put money into them because they love to see them look beautifully and be restored. There are also those, and there's a man named Donald Ripkema who has focused on economics and preservation. There's a lot of literature that he has written, and there's a lot of studies that he has undertaken. And I believe, and I haven't looked at his resources in a while, but he has studies that show that if you live in a regulated historic community and people maintain and keep their properties up to the historic standards, recognizing that ordinary maintenance and repair is the key to long-term preservation, that their property values are enhanced. It's the protection of the whole that advances the increase in value. So that is a person who has really focused on this particular aspect of the preservation dilemma. So, I think that the National Trust for Historic Preservation has online libraries that have a lot of his materials, so that you might be able to look at them and and see what you can bring from them. But I wouldn't look at it as an impediment, because and maybe where the maybe where some of the the funding, like I think I mentioned last time that I had purchased really beautiful dilapidated old house in Brunswick, and it had good bones. That was how I looked at it. This house had a future, and I restored it, and the outside of the building looked like it did back in 1868. The inside of the building was just absolutely a gorgeous place. I ended up making a huge amount of money. It was my first real estate investment, and it was in an area that was not regulated. But the city had this very modest abatement program. It was modest. I think I got something like a $25,000 tax abatement that decreased over a course. Would that have made the difference in what I did? No, but it is something. So shall I continue with the other
Yes,
things?
please.
So I think one of the most important, what are the best practices for engaging the community in historic preservation efforts? I think one of the reasons when I looked over the proposal for the design guidelines, and I saw the one from fellow that you decided to hire, is his focus on education and involvement of the community. And, I'm an attorney, so people would say we don't involve the community, but I think it's absolutely the critical part, providing education, having, events where you invite people and you show them what it is that you do, what you can do, and the fact that you can be a benefit to them in the long run. So, I'm gonna kind of put it to the side because it's really not my bailiwick, but I think you chose the professional who is going to bring in the community. It's right.
I have a question in that regard. One of the things that was mentioned by Stephen actually, at the conference, when I shared with him that three of us are going to be working with him, he suggested that he felt we could add members, other shareholders when we were meeting with him. So, and one of the things he suggested was a local chamber of commerce, and I explained that we had the liaison with Karen with the River Center.
River Center has asked to be on the committee for the design guidelines.
Oh,
I
okay.
was gonna bring it up at the.
Oh, okay,
Fine,
good.
thank you.
And so that's all right. That's all I have to say about
Okay.
that.
I think it's a good idea to do outreach in every neighborhood that is either already designated or that you might to look upon to designate in future. So, and just bring them on board as early and as often as possible. And, because communication and understanding are really important in the success of any preservation program. So the next question is, what are best practices in general when it comes to empowering an HPC? So practices and empowerment are really kind of like two different things, but the powers of an HPC in New Jersey are derived from the land use law. You have two powers essentially. You have a power to review permit applications and you have the power to provide advice on applications for development. The best practices and how to deal with the powers that you have in this community by virtue of your ordinance is to work with people that are coming to you for approvals. Make it an open process. And the most critical part of it is to get those design guidelines going. I said it from day one, and I'll say it until the end of days. Okay, that is what you need to really improve the communications and the understandings. Now, are examples of how an HPC with enforcement power. Now that's like really, so you have your regulation. And let's say you, and then let's say that you put in a condition and it says that you do certain design elements and they're imposed. And then they go build a building and they don't have the design elements. That's where the enforcement, you're not an enforcement agency. Your governing body does all the enforcement. And so there are two ways. And one of the things that I look at, and I did look at here, you have a very good property maintenance ordinance. It's already in place. There are some little specific elements that can be added to the standard standard prevention, property management, property maintenance ordinances, which usually come from the same codes that we get our uniform construction codes. They come from an entity that creates codes that municipalities throughout the country use, okay? And so, there's certain things that can be put in terms of protection against deteriorating trim and things of that nature, but you do have a good ordinance. It's just that somebody else has to enforce it. You are not the enforcer. And other thing that I know that Liam has brought up, and which is a standard problem, is the problem of demolition by neglect, okay? Where you purchase a piece of property, you don't take care of it, it gets to be in such bad shape, and you say, oh, it's too far gone, I can't fix it. So that is where, that's how, and it was, wealthy elderly women in Savannah that came up with the idea of the demolition delay. We have it in our ordinance, it's used in many ordinances throughout the country. That it puts a delay into the actual, right, the right of someone to demolish. And there's a whole process that gets involved to avoid a taking of property. That, if something really is so bad that it can't be redone. There are different standards and criteria, but you get to the point where you say, okay, I'm gonna demolish this building, I have to demolish it. Then you have to offer to people and they have the, sell it. So, and if somebody steps to the plate and comes up with money, then you can save the building. In Savannah, that beautiful city, after World War II, was facing great crises. And the women themselves created the funds. They would purchase a building, they would restore the building, or they would sell it with restrictions to have it preserved. So those are, we do have demolition delay, but someone has to step to the plate when something is potentially being threatened with demolition. I know one instance, I did work for, did Cape May years ago, I did Ocean City years ago. And Ocean City successfully saved their historic Coast Guard station through the demolition delay. So, that's the best I can say about it.
I ask you a demolition related question. In Red Bank, if someone wants to demolish a property, does that be historic? Is that person required to get a permit to do that?
Yes, there's a demolition permit under UCC.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
So that initiates the process. In other words, that gets it to our attention. Someone would have to violate the order.
Well, if you're designated historic, if you're designated in a district, or you're a designated site, then they would have to come here first for a permit and prove that they meet the criteria for demolition. I thought you said if it's not designated.
But, well, I did. And so who is the first, who receives in Red Bank, who receives that permit?
Is it for a regulated historic site or is it for an unregulated?
Both. Let's be
So
clear.
what we try to do here is the ordinance is drafted in such a way that anyone applying for a permit to demolish is a permit, is encouraged to come here first, but they don't have to. They could go to they could go right to the construction code official or whoever is the assigned person and that it's usually construction code official. And it's any construction code official under the state law must establish that all prior approvals have been met. The prior approval includes any permits required under land use and under historic preservation. So then they would refer it here, and then you have that 45-day period because you were created as a weak but not a strong commission. So you would have to review it in a rather timely fashion, go through the criteria in the ordinance, make your recommendations to the planning board, and then the planning board will decide what to do.
Okay, so to summarize, the construction officer knows if someone shows up there requesting a permit to demolish and they play dumb, or they may actually just not know that they're in a historic property, but they apply for the permit, he will cross-check. He should have the tools and the knowledge to refer to us.
Yes, and that's why I consistently recommend that everybody in the town that has a role in granting any permits have a map, the zoning map with the historic preservation overlay, designation overlay. So that they say, oh, okay, well, and it really is good if you have the map accompanied by lot and block designation.
And they have that in the construction.
You're asking me, I don't work.
All right. And they have.
You'd have to ask Shawna.
They check with me first.
They always check.
They always
with
check
you.
with me.
Always check. Good. Okay.
That's good. So
Because
that's,
at the end of the day, if someone were to ask me what's the, like, if we could only accomplish one thing, what would it be? It would be to prevent historic properties from being demolished.
what most say. So,
I also have a question about demolition. So it's one of the things that was mentioned again at the conference was when a demolition is applied for, the phrase undue hardship is used. Yeah, so, but they took great care in saying that that was not the economic impact of the owner, but it seems like that's like the justification that a lot of people
yes.
bring up. So I guess I'm looking for the difference between those two concepts.
So, so you're absolutely correct in that the biggest objection that you hear, how much it's gonna cost us, what if we had to do a slate roof? So first thing, and this is, you know, this issue of economic hardship involves a blend of what is his land use law with what are the criteria for variances, because there are certain variances that are based on hardship, and a hardship variance is not a variance that is based on economics, but it is based on the size, shape of property or some aspect of it that makes it impracticable. That's really what the statute says, to comply. When preservation was first enabled in 1985, and a lot of towns put in ordinances, in facing public opposition to the ordinances, they put in a hardship provision that said that if the cost of doing something was prohibitive, then the commission could grant relief. And many of the design guidelines themselves have integrated into them economic factors. So not uncommon to find design guidelines that say, if you have a slate roof and the slate roof cannot be repaired, which is kind of interesting question of when it can and when it can't. But let's say somebody can prove to you that it's so badly deteriorated that you can't repair it. They gave options in the design guidelines for replacement roofs because the cost of a slate roof was really quite prohibitive. So would involve the city of Newark in the Forest Hill section. I'm pretty sure that that's what it was, that they had this hardship provision. And the state attorney general rendered an opinion and said it's illegal. State attorney general's opinions are not binding law, okay? But the problem is that if you, as a commission or the governing body is enacting an ordinance, and they're going to enact, the design guidelines get enacted by ordinance. And they say, we don't care how much it costs, we can't look at it. Count on, you're probably not going to get that ordinance. I think it's this is a debate that has permeated in many, many different areas. And there are some consultants who will say that that's a crazy opinion. Yes, there is an opinion of the attorney general. Yes, nobody knows how to find it, and it's not available in the law books. And it says you can't look at economics, okay? I think design guidelines and anyone who writes them in a way that makes them feasible in a community has a certain element of economics. Inevitably, you picked up the conflict. Your opposition is going to be money, and it'll, you know, so there are just inherent difficulties. So I don't think that money per se should be the determining factors. That's why we got to get these design guidelines going, because there's some really phenomenal language that I've seen that says basically, let's say you have the slate roof and it's so farly deteriorated that the underlayment is deteriorated and replacement of the roof would be so prohibitively expensive, and we could put, you know, one of the new slate roofs, yet they don't look like the old slate roofs, but you know, there was a woman who did, you know, Heritage Consulting. Actually, she did some of your work years. ago.
Yeah, I think I talked to her.
Connie Greig.
Yeah.
So Connie was like considered to be the grandmother of historic preservation in New Jersey. And she founded Preservation New Jersey. She was president until I became president. So she really, you know, she really knew her stuff too. Siding is the other one, you know, but she said some of the new historic substitute siding was so real that she would have to go and knock on it to see if it was wood. So these are decisions that are made when you write your design guidelines. So you create enough flexibility that you're not backed into a corner, that it must be slate or you don't have it. That's where the rubber hits the road. Is in the design guidelines and how you're gonna word them. And remember, you're gonna make them, you're gonna help draw them up with your new consultant. Your borough council is going to have to adopt them. Otherwise, they're not part of the ordinance, and that's what they're supposed to be. So think about that when you're writing them up, to build in the type of, you know, flexibility that may, you know, be something you need to not be overly strict. And that's not prohibited. What the Attorney General's decision, assuming that you would give it the weight of law, which is not necessarily the case, under case law is weight of the law, not Attorney General's opinion. There was an ordinance provision that said that if you come before the commission and you say, it's too expensive for me to comply, they can give you relief. I don't think anybody wants to do that. So just, you know,
I think what it comes down to, and what you mentioned already, was that pre-approval or
prior approval.
conceptual, some kind of conversation about what they want to
Oh,
do.
yes.
Because to have an understanding that if the slate roof can be repaired, if the issue was leaks, and it only requires 10% of the roof to be replaced with slate, or if you have windows, you know, if they can be repaired, or if they can't be repaired, to make sure it matches the style that was there previously. You know, so I think when we get down to it, and I don't know, when we get Stephen on board, these are some questions for him, of course. But so that we have an understanding when somebody comes before us, what are our expectations?
Well, your expectations are going to be in the design guidelines.
Right, that's what I'm saying. But
And those design guidelines are, if developed in a process that brings the community in, are available for people, they can go on the website, they can find them, they can come in and get a print of them. That's what that is, and that becomes a selling point. And it really does, it becomes a selling point, because people say, gee, I bought this house, I really love old houses, I don't know much about them, I just love them. But look at this, I just found this wealth of information that my town has presented in the design guideline. So that's where it is, and then you're gonna apply the design guidelines on a basis, you know, that it's not gonna be case by case. You have a standard to refer to. Okay?
Mhm.
Okay, so now, why age matters, okay? This has to do with the criteria for designation. Just, you know, that the National Register criteria, which has been essentially adopted in New Jersey, they just, age is a factor, but not a compelling factor. It is not the only factor, and you cannot just designate something because it's old. There are things that it needs to have. It needs to have some, you look at the National Register criteria, there are things in our ordinance that broadly, incorporate those National Register criteria. And those are also what's supposed to be in the master plan in historic preservation element. The element is supposed to say, here's what we look at in terms of why something should be designated. I think the National Register always had like a 50-year minimum, but it just age itself doesn't qualify for the designation. Does that answer that question? I don't know who did it.
So I had a question. I mean, when we look at the originally designated parts of Red Bank, they were all based simply on age. There's nothing historical about any of the houses in the historic district or the, maybe the, Temple of Fashion on Broad Street. But all of those were originally designated simply because of their age. So why is that not heavily weighed factor, especially in the collective group of houses of Red Bank? That's what makes Red Bank unique, is not one or two different old houses, but all the old houses together in these neighborhoods creates the character.
I'm not so sure that that was why they got designated. I just, I think one of the biggest challenges I faced when I began working on this in Red Bank is that your documentation was like, not readily available and seemed to like kind of be all over the place. So I know that, you had, like that, when I mentioned Heritage Consulting, your 2009 master plan has a very, lengthy discussion of why things should be designated as historic, other than age. So I think maybe you didn't have all the paper. I know, every time I turned around, I kept thinking there was something else that I missed. That where was this or where was that? And there was like, it was kind of, to some extent like a pendulum swing. That you'd see all these things at big length of properties and description of them. And don't forget, you had the Monmouth County survey, which was, very, if you use the Monmouth County survey, they base it on National Register criteria as to whether or not something qualified. So I think there was just something you hadn't seen. I didn't see anything that indicated anything was based solely on age. And I know you can't get on the national without just by age. So remember, it's the master plan historic preservation element sets up the criteria. What are the criteria for designation? That was mandated by statute. That was why when I was initially working on it, before the change in government and the new master plan came into effect, and they didn't have anything on in the historic preservation element, we went back and they made changes to it in order to put in some additional information. I do think that it would be a really good idea to have it more comprehensively addressed so that it also addresses the interrelationship to, it's supposed to address the interrelationship to other elements of the master plan. That includes the land use element, and the land use element is what defines the density and intensity of development. Again, that's a very important piece in the whole puzzle, so. But, it's like, I think, you're making a tremendous amount of progress, and that's what happens. It doesn't come as quickly as many, I would prefer, but, and I'm sure many would prefer, but that's government, it's slow. So, and it was asked for, examples of how Fairhaven, Cape May, Morristown, and other towns are effectively using this criteria, i.e. the criteria of age. I have no idea what Fairhaven does. Cape May uses age is almost like a non-entity in Cape May because of the nature of the community. They have all kinds of architectural standards and things like that. I haven't seen, the last I worked in Morristown was many, many years ago, and they had no ordinance, so. Okay, What powers do existing ordinances give our HPC? Are we strictly advisory or do we have regulatory powers? So. You have two powers. You have the permit review function and you review applications for development. The permit is something not approved by the application for development, but these two pieces always seem to get intertwined, okay? You are a weak commission. In that respect, when you get a permit, you comment, make your recommendations, and the planning board decides whether or not to implement those recommendations. And you're purely advisory on applications for development, so you have no regulatory power. Is there a flow chart? I know that. I'm sorry.
I just had a follow-up question. It's general, but why would a city have a weak commission over a strong commission? What's the reason for that?
Because the governing body in adopting the ordinance did not want to invest the power to control the issuance of permits with the HPC.
I'm happy to speak to it too. When we were drafting, we went back and forth on that particular issue. For us, it was more about checks and balances than it was. And I think we were looking for land use boards that were making determinations collaboratively so that it really would be in most cases a non-issue, that the planning board had the final sign off, that this board was able to make its case and that these land use boards were working together. Unfortunately, we had a past where that wasn't always happening and it had led to a lot of strife between the boards. And obviously, as Michelle's pointing out, when it's an application for development, a lot of times it's directed to those land use boards anyway first. So this was a way to kind of keep it full circle.
I just need clarification on one thing in the ordinance. Under scope and purpose, the first one reads, the commission shall report to the planning board and zoning board of adjustment on development applications for properties in the historic district, et cetera, et cetera. So can we interpret development, new construction, that it would add to, it would be sympathetic to the design in that, you know, there's a lot of tear downs going around. So what replaces those tear downs? Do we have the ability to advise that they would be kind of historically, add to it as opposed to something that's just like a drop-in? Like, I'm thinking of the one, it's not in the historic district, but on Shrewsbury that people put up a little stink about, the one that just was like prefab housing that was just like a box. Do we have the ability to, in a designated district, kind of have that conceptual plan approved by us before they go for the permits?
Only if it is designated either as a site or a district, it comes here for a permit for demolition. Now, this is a very interesting twist with respect to a strong and a weak commission. But because all right, so let's assume you had a strong commission and you have an ordinance that regulates demolition. You need a permit, which is what you do. You have an ordinance that regulates demolition or relocation. You have it. So, but if you had a strong commission, in that particular instance, I won a big case years ago, and it really is considered to be, I mean, it was decided by courts and reinforced. Technically, the planning board has no jurisdiction over demolition. You can go through every power of a planning board. They don't regulate demolition. So in a strong strong commission community, the commission had the solely regulatory power over demolition. Because you have a weak commission, you make your recommendations to the planning board and the planning board accepts or rejects them.
Maybe I'm not being clear. We currently have a property on River Road that has already been demolished. It's like across from the hospital. It's blank, like they have some trees there and grass. So somebody owns that property. I don't know who owns that property. But if somebody decides to build on that, do we have any say-so in that what they put on that property should reflect in some way what was there in the past, as opposed to something that is mid-century modern, for example?
You need design guidelines to address it.
But you're asking, even if it's not in a district, do you
It's a, and if,
have an opportunity
Alright.
Yeah,
to present an opinion to another land use board?
yeah.
You don't think, there's no reason
Advocate.
not, right?
you
in-
can advocate for something, but you don't have any power.
But that, in the case you're saying, that is in the historic district.
Right.
So if it's in a historic district, then you run into the most intractable problem of new construction in a district. There's always this issue, and if you notice, Steve, when he was here on his interview, he even at one point said something. You know, like, you know, of course, and then integrating new construction, how difficult it is. It is very difficult introducing new construction. First of all, what does the zoning allow? Does the zoning allow something that doesn't follow the prevailing pattern of development that dominates in that particular historic district? So this is a multi-layered type of an answer, but it, you know, there is, you do look at new construction under the ordinance, but looking at new construction and deciding what to do with it are really two very different things, and it's very, very challenging. And I can remember when I represented the city of Plainfield for 30 planning board and their historic preservation commission. They put in a commission before the state law. So that's how long I did it. And they and that's when I first met Gail Hunton, who worked with the Monmouth County for so many years, and she's one of the best preservation consultants that I know. So they had the designated historic district, and there was a piece of property that was empty. The developer didn't own it when it had a building on it. The building had fallen down years ago. So it comes in with a vacant piece of property, follows the zoning. We try to get the historic design guidelines in to like improve the value of it, but it was the whole zoning entitlement, okay? It was putting icing on a cake that didn't fit. So that's why much of this, all that question goes back to make sure that when you're in this process of design guidelines and you're working with them, that you use that as the opportunity to try to make sure you can vision what would happen with an empty site like that in an area that's a designated historic district. And it has to be right. You don't make it up as you go. You create the framework and the guidelines to help you make those decisions. Does that help?
So we just have to be aware when somebody comes in, for example, and asks to build on 6 Spring Street, that this is a consideration that we have purview in terms of what should go up on that lot.
You say to me?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, all right, well, you're saying it's in a historic district.
Yes.
So being it's in a historic district, even though it's vacant, if it comes in for a application for development, it's gonna be referred here. And if it comes here for a permit, you're gonna be reviewing it in that context. Because somebody in City Hall, and I know, I think that Shawna, you must work like, 22 hours a day.
Working right now.
So, but you do have maps, right? So like if you're not around, they can't find you.
Yeah, they have the list. So the list that Marjorie so nicely narrowed down for us, they have that in the front desk. So my admin, she checks that against it as soon as we get the application.
So that's where, and then, you know, and then you work on it there. And again, this is another great example of a way that if you become an asset to the community by helping them to design something. And when you design something and it fits in a neighborhood and it's attractive, people want it, they like it, is, you know, it just has tremendous advantages. You know, so. About the
Can
flow
I chime
chart.
in real quick on that one? Can you guys hear me?
Yes,
Isn't that where it was just a garage on that site?
6 Spring Street, I don't know, it's vacant now.
There was an old garage on the corner
Yeah, there was
for a
garage.
long time. Was there a house there as well?
There were 3 houses, so one was on Spring Street, then you had the corner garage, then you had 2 other houses on River Road or Front Street there.
So did they combine lots?
They purchased all of them eventually and then,
Yeah. It was purchased by someone for like 1.2 million, and then he sold it to Riverview for 5 million a couple of years later after he tore everything down.
Okay. I guess what I'm saying is I think we have to be careful with that one because there was a garage on part of that site. It was just a rundown garage, not that it wasn't necessarily contributing to that historic area, right?
no, but my comment is that if they decide to build something in a historic district, it should not be totally out of style with what's around it.
I guess my point is that garage wasn't either though, right? So
But
anything they do
It's
to
part of a
recreate something-
complex.
But something must have predated the garage.
It doesn't really matter, because now you have a vacant piece of property. So if
Right.
someone comes in to develop it, the design guidelines would hopefully you'd have a combination of 2 factors that are gonna determine what's gonna go there. The zoning and the historic design guidelines.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
everything else is just speculation, so to speak. They have some zoning rights, whatever they might be. And then how they implement those zoning rights consistent with preservation is something yet to be determined. But just because it might have had a garage, or it might have had a ramshackle building, or maybe it had nothing, it's vacant and it's in a historic district, it's regulated because that affects the whole.
The original developer had a plan that was already presented. And it was basically a part of Riverview, hospital building. So would not fit within any kind of historic guideline or character.
So again, I don't know where it all stands. I'm always uncomfortable when somebody else's property is being discussed and they're not here. So, but all I can say is there would be, whatever happens in the future with any vacant property that is in a designated district is going to be determined by the zoning and the design guidelines. And you're gonna write those guidelines to address some of the things that you might come up with now that would help you later on down the road. Okay, flow chart. I thought that, Shauna, didn't you have a flow chart? I thought you showed me a flow chart. Yes, so there is a flow chart. Yeah.
On the website, but yeah, I can, yeah.
A link.
I'll send it to you.
Right.
So the flow chart that was created, kind of just breaks down the development permit purposes. It shows where, what needs a development permit and, what happens if the application is denied and what, like if it needs grading review or it needs HPC approval, so it explains that process, and then it explains if someone needs like the fire marshal permit or permit from the construction office. So, but I'm happy to share that.
Okay, so, the Daniels Law. All right, so Daniels Law is something that's under the Open Public Records Act. I attended a seminar when the law first came into effect. It would have been in 2023. And there were 6 attorneys who do all municipal work. And every single one of them had questions differences of opinion, etc. It is outside of the realm of historic preservation. It has to do with what somebody can ask to the town to get names and addresses and information. So you need to know where the property is, you need to have what it is. I honestly would have to defer to your town attorney, because I don't even know if there's any cases, it's not historical.
Well, okay, the context in which it was brought up at the Saturday session. One of the HBCs that was represented mentioned that because of Daniel's Law, they are no longer, when the public is attending a meeting and is recognized, we, I think, have a practice of asking them to give their name and their address, and that goes on the record. It's recorded. And it's, you know, I think part of our minutes.
Yeah.
And there is a town that has stopped doing that because of Daniel's Law. And what I think what they're doing is they're only putting, basically the property identification information.
By block number,
Block and. tax.
yeah, and not street address.
Yep.
Yeah, all right, so Daniel's Law arose out of commercial entities seeking public records from municipalities that disclosed, was like getting a whole address book for marketing purposes, okay? I would prefer not to comment about Daniel's Law because it's an Open Public Records Act issue. It is hotly debated. Those who wish to be extremely cautious, don't let anybody disclose anything. And it really has to do not with what is said here, but if someone requests the transcript of what they said here, the clerk, custodian of the records, can bleep out or redact the document to eliminate certain identifiers. You know, if you don't need to ask people for their address, don't ask for it. You don't have to. You could say, what's your name? Okay.
Well, in the law, they talk about covered persons, you know, and the origin of the laws as it was explained to us was the judge whose son was murdered
Yes,
when somebody came to
Exactly.
her house.
yes.
So if we're talking about a covered person, I think, I just to clarify, I think that we could at least ask somebody if they are a resident of Red Bank.
You could do that. Yeah. I don't think it, I
And
don't think
just leave it
there's
at that, so
it-
we know if this is somebody who actually lives here or has come in from some other town to comment on something that is going on here.
just remember, Daniel's Law is a limitation on the ability to get certain information through an Open Public Records Act request. So we keep it in the context. If you could set up a rule that all you want people to do is say, my name is Jane Jones and I live in Red Bank, and that would be fine. Okay. All right, the next one is limiting review to what is visible. Do we define visible? We just say exterior. That's all it says in our ordinance, exterior. Some ordinances say exterior, visible from a public street. Your ordinance does not say that. Okay? What do we have to do to become a certified local government? A lot. First of all, don't even think about doing it until you have comprehensive design guidelines. You have certain things that you have, there, you know, I'm just gonna, you've got to take your National Register listed properties and get them regulated. They're not legally regulated. You only have resolutions for the most important resources in your community. So this is the booklet. I am going to have it. It's the most current booklet from the state office. It has far less of an advantage than it's gonna cost you to comply. So that you know.
Well, there's currently 43 CLGs in the state. Last time somebody quoted that figure to me, it was 30. So in the last year or since last June, 13 municipalities have gotten that designation. The one thing that was mentioned is at this point, it couldn't hurt and they would be willing to review our ordinance as a first step. Because sometimes they ask for an amendment to our ordinance, and if our ordinance is not acceptable to them, I don't think, I mean, maybe we shouldn't pursue it, but as a first step, I don't think that that's gonna take a lot of time to submit our ordinance to Andrea Tingley.
Andrea Tingley is gonna make, Andrea Tingley has made the ability of municipalities to get qualified as certified local government an extremely costly undertaking. She does it because and all I'm gonna say is, I don't wanna get into looking at this right now, because I can just tell you that until you have design guidelines, and until you have absolute complete surveys for everything that's regulated and even beyond, you're not gonna get past square one. If you wanna send it to her, go right ahead, but I don't recommend that you do so until you have a package to give her.
Okay.
And I'll say it in a public meeting.
Got it.
She's one of the most difficult people that you'll ever deal with.
I didn't get that impression, but that
Well,
could be just me.
Yeah, she's difficult, believe me.
Okay,
So what financial incentives, I think we went over.
yeah, we went over that.
And I think we did demolition, I think we have
Yep,
covered
we did
that. So, I think there's always, there's always a way to strengthen any ordinance. And again, it's the political will to do so. My experience has been that when the commission has begun to have like acceptance in the community, okay, that the community recognizes that what you're doing is a valuable component of the maintenance of their quality of life, okay? And again, I think most people that buy historic homes do it because they love historic homes. They don't do it because they want to wreck them. I mean, there are developers certainly, and depends where it is and where the development pressures are, but they don't want to have something stick out like a sore thumb. And again, you're doing the right thing. You proceeded very cautiously to make sure you have a good consultant on board to help you with the design guidelines. And that's the most productive process that you could do at this point. And then assembling, I know, Marjorie, you've been working on assembling information, and as I said, it was one of the most challenging things that I faced when I first came on board. Like, where did all this come from? Could you have some very expansive lists, and then you have others, and so there's just a lot of information. I have attempted in this book to put together everything that I could find. And I think that, if there's one thing I would recommend that you do sooner rather than later, and I think it would, because you already have everything there to do this, is ask the governing body to designate the National Register listed properties.
Well, I think that's one of the things we're gonna try and work on this year, is move those up into, and take away the TBA for local ordinances. The other thing that I think I'll just put it out there. They said that the survey should be repeated every 10 years.
Yeah, supposed to update it.
So, in the last time it was done here was 2009. And so hopefully as part of the work that Stephen does for us, that will establish a basis to go forward and, keep a record of where we are.
Right, and so the other thing when you're dealing with the survey, because the survey work can easily end up consuming a large part of the money that you have available. Every time he wants to do every time you kind of identify what you want to survey, if someone here would first go to the available data, and I understand like Monmouth County. My understanding is that they regularly are updating. You know, they don't do it like, you know, full, but they do a regular update of the survey. So, you know, look at available resources first. And, you know, proceed. The Monmouth County stuff is available online, as I understand it. So. I think that gets us through to all of the questions. Does anybody have, how are you doing with the design guidelines? Have you met with with Steve?
Not as of yet. I'm waiting till the borough's budget gets approved so that I actually have the funds available for him. And talking to the CFO and the borough and manager on the budget, if I'm not incorrect, Christina, it looks like May, the funds will be available. So Stephen understands that, and we've been emailing each other back and forth for contract purposes and things like that. We plan to start in May, and he wants to meet with the committee first, so, yeah.
So but you got a grant for that, right?
Yeah, but the grant funds haven't been awarded yet because the governor hasn't signed yet. So that's another thing. So once I have some money for him to start, then I can
I see.
get him to work. I don't want to invoice that is gonna be
No, I know.
held up for like 2 months. Yeah. I want to get my people paid.
So we can't even begin the survey process then until May?
I just don't want him to send an invoice that I can't pay immediately.
Okay, because one of his definitions of a survey was not like the survey of historic places, but to survey some stakeholders as
And
to
actually-
what their expectations are for design guidelines, and that's where you bring in.
His community outreach,
Yeah.
that again is built into what he plans to do. As for the architectural survey, he actually wanted, once when we do the kickoff meeting, to have, like a clearer definition of what the commission wants from that. So that's another topic for the, when we have the kickoff meeting with him. But just because I don't, as a former consultant, I understand how when you send an invoice and you're waiting 2-3 months. I know that's just a pain and it messes with your book, so to be cautious of our consultant, I
Oh,
have just, I wanted to let you know that I'm deferring him starting until we have some funds for that. Whichever comes first, either the grant funding or the budget gets approved, but once I have something there for him, then I'll have him start.
Are we allowed to communicate with him before that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if he's the type of guy that, bills every time you email him. I'm not sure if he's that type of guy. But sure, you can communicate with him. But yeah, just be a little wary of that. That when they do send out their invoices, they do it intent to be paid.
you want to lean on what I hear?
See this.
I think it would be new business.
Oh, in the next meeting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can comment on it now, but Michelle's,
So,
And I just want to add also, we have 10 minutes left, so of this meeting, and then we have to close out to start our regular meeting, right, Michelle? And I just have to switch out the Zoom. Okay, because there's 2 different links. I wasn't smart enough to continue on the next one, sorry.
no, hold that for the second meeting?
yeah.
Okay.
Are there any more questions, or do you just want to take a 10-minute break?
Or do we want to adjourn this meeting? Yeah.
Yeah.
Great, yes.
We did the workshop first.
We did the workshop first.
Dinner. I don't
There's more sandwiches in there.
Yeah, let's adjourn.
Done.
the meeting.
There's sandwiches in there.
All right, does anyone want to move to adjourn?
I'm a,
We're having a meeting.
Second,
First is Marjorie, and then second is Blaine.
let's have a vote.
All in favor?
All in favor? Aye.
Okay,
All opposed?
All right.
Passes.
thank you.
All right, we-
Anthony, I sent you a link. If you want to join the meeting, I sent you another link, Zoom link to the next one, so you can
Okay,
click.
I'll sign off this one and onto that one.
Yes,
Okay, I'll be back.
thank you.
can I just see that packet?